After a long business trip, a man returns home with a heart full of gratitude. But when he secretly overhears a conversation in the kitchen, he witnesses his wife cruelly humiliating his elderly mother. In silence, he begins an investigation and uncovers a pattern of subtle, violent, and deliberate abuse. Now, with the truth in his hands, he must choose between maintaining appearances or saving the one who always loved him in silence. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. Let's continue. I promise you this is going to be the best story you will ever listen to. The plane landed at Heathrow International Airport at 7 in the morning on a sunny Tuesday. Richard Matsumoto adjusted his tie knot as he walked through the terminal, pulling his black executive suitcase. 3 weeks in China, negotiating technology import contracts had been exhausting but extremely lucrative. His electronic components company was about to become the largest distributor in the state of New York. At 42, Richard was living proof that determination and hard work paid off. In the taxi on the way to Kensington, where his mansion was located, he watched London wake up. London never truly slept, only dozed between one shift and another. He thought of Marianne, his wife of 5 years. She must still be sleeping, probably in that silk nightgown he liked so much. And his mother, Mrs. Yoshiko, who had moved into their home 2 months ago, after her arthritis worsened, and she could no longer live alone in her Shoreditch apartment. Richard smiled, imagining the surprise of the 2 women. He had managed to anticipate his flight by a day and hadn't told anyone. He wanted to see the genuine joy on Marianne's face. He wanted to hug his mother without warning. He missed that small Shoreditch apartment where he had grown up, the smell of miso soup in the morning, the stories Mrs. Yoshiko told about a Japan she had never known, but which her parents had conveyed with such vividness. The electronic gate opened, and Richard asked the taxi driver to drop him right there at the entrance. He paid the fare with a £50 note and waved off the change. It was 8:30 in the morning. He carried his suitcase through the Portuguese stone entrance, admiring the gardens Marianne had redesigned the previous year. Everything was impeccable, every bush in its place, every flower matching the next. His wife had good taste. That was undeniable. Instead of using the main door key, Richard decided to enter through the side of the house, through the door leading to the service area. It would be more fun to surprise them through the kitchen. Perhaps his mother was preparing breakfast. Perhaps Marianne was already awake, drinking her morning green juice. He leaned the suitcase against the outer wall and walked silently along the stone path that led to the back of the property. The sound reached him before he could see anything. An altered, high-pitched voice cutting through the morning air. Richard stopped instinctively. He knew that voice. It was Marianne. But there was something different, something he had never heard in that tone. Anger, contempt. He approached slowly, pressing himself against the wall, and through the half-open kitchen window he could see the scene. Marianne had her back to him, wearing a pink robe, her blonde hair tied in a messy bun. His mother was sitting at the table, hunched over a plate, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Yoshiko was 73 years old, a small woman with always neatly combed grey hair. At that moment she seemed even smaller, shrinking into herself. Marianne's voice cut through the air again. "What do you think this is? Some cheap Shoreditch boarding house? Look at the smell of this food. It stinks. It stinks of that Oriental stuff I can't stand anymore." Richard felt his blood run cold. He stood paralyzed, unable to process what he was hearing. "I didn't ask you to come live here, understood?" Marianne continued, turning to grab something from the counter. "It was Richard who insisted, who talked about your arthritis, your loneliness. But the truth is, you don't fit in this house. Look at you, look at those ridiculous clothes, those flip-flops. This is Kensington, not some dawn market." Mrs. Yoshiko mumbled something Richard couldn't hear. Her voice was so low, so weak. He saw his mother raise her hand as if to defend herself, or perhaps just to explain. "Don't give me excuses, and don't talk to me in Japanese. I don't understand, and I don't want to understand." Marianne took the plate in front of the elderly woman and threw its contents into the trash. "This horrible food only serves to make the house smell of misery. Next time, eat in your room, or better yet, don't even cook. Nancy is here for that. Richard recoiled. The shock was so immense that he needed to process, needed to understand. That couldn't be Marianne. Not the woman he had married, the woman who smiled in home decor magazine photos, who organized charity teas, who spoke gently about empathy and respect. That person there in that kitchen was a stranger. He returned the same way, picked up his suitcase, and walked to the car parked in the garage. His hands trembled as he put the key in the ignition. He took a deep breath. He thought about entering through the front door immediately and confronting Marianne, but something inside him held back the impulse. He needed to know more. He needed to understand if this was an isolated moment, an outburst of stress, or if it was something bigger, something he had been too blind to see. Richard deliberately started the engine, revving it twice so the sound echoed through the property. He waited a few seconds, turned off the car, picked up his suitcase, and walked to the main door. He opened it with his key, making noise on purpose. "Hi, I'm home!" he shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a brief silence, then hurried footsteps. Marianne appeared in the hallway, her robe now adjusted, her face composing an expression of surprise and joy. "Darling, you didn't tell me. What a wonderful surprise." She ran to him and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him enthusiastically. "3 weeks is too long. I missed you terribly." Richard hugged her mechanically, his eyes searching over her shoulder. Mrs. Yoshiko appeared at the kitchen entrance, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was tense, but she managed a smile when she saw her son. "My son, welcome," she said in Portuguese mixed with Japanese, as she always did. "Hi, Mum. How are you?" Richard released Marianne and walked to Mrs. Yoshiko, hugging her carefully. Well, I was making tea. Would you like some?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Of course. I'd love some." Marianne put her arm around Richard's waist. "We were having such a lovely morning here, weren't we, Yoshiko? Talking about recipes, about the little plants in the garden. Your mother is wonderful company." Mrs. Yoshiko merely nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. Richard observed every detail. The tension in his mother's shoulders, the way she avoided looking directly at Marianne, the nervousness in her hands. And Marianne, so relaxed, so natural, as if nothing had happened minutes before. It was theatre. Perfect theatre. Night fell over the Kensington mansion like a heavy shroud. Richard lay beside Marianne, who was sleeping soundly, her breathing soft and regular. He, however, couldn't close his eyes. Every time he tried, he saw the morning scene repeating like a film in his mind. The cruel words, the contempt in his wife's voice, the humiliation on his mother's face. During dinner, everything had seemed normal. Marianne had chatted animatedly about the landscaping project she was developing, about the new spa she had discovered in Canary Wharf, about her friends from the book club. Mrs. Yoshiko had eaten in silence, responding only when asked, always with polite monosyllables. Richard had observed every interaction, every glance, every pause. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleeping. He got up carefully so as not to wake Marianne and went down to his office. The house had a complete security system, with cameras in all rooms except the bedrooms and bathrooms. He rarely checked the recordings, trusting the monitoring company for that. But now, sitting in front of the computer, he needed to know the truth. The system stored 30 days of recordings. Richard began to review the previous day's images, then went back further. He fast-forwarded, stopping only when he saw his mother and Marianne in the same environment. In the first videos, everything seemed calm. Brief conversations in the living room, passages through the kitchen, nothing extraordinary. But then, on the 10th day of recording, he saw it. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Yoshiko was in the kitchen, preparing something on the stove. Marianne entered, gesticulating angrily. There was no audio, but the body language was unmistakable. She pointed to the pot, to the elderly woman, to the door. Then she took the pot and poured all its contents into the trash. Mrs. Yoshiko recoiled, bringing her hands to her face. Richard felt his stomach churn. He continued watching. 15 days ago, another episode. Marianne lightly pushing his mother in the hallway, making her stumble. 18 days ago, throwing a napkin in her face during lunch. And there was more. much more. Small gestures of cruelty, cutting glances, expressions of disdain. On the 23rd day, the recording showed something worse. It was morning, in the kitchen again. Mrs. Yoshiko was washing dishes at the sink when Marianne approached from behind. There was an argument. The elderly woman turned, tried to say something. Marianne pushed her hard. Mrs. Yoshiko hit her back against the sink and fell to the floor. She lay there for a few seconds, clearly in pain. Marianne simply left the kitchen without looking back. Richard paused the video. His hands trembled. Tears of anger and sadness streamed down his face. How had he not noticed? How had he been so blind? How many times had his mother tried to say something, and he had been too busy with meetings, with contracts, with the company? He saved all relevant videos to a USB drive, but he needed more evidence. He needed to understand the full extent of the situation. He waited until 5 in the morning, when he was sure Marianne would still sleep for at least 2 hours. He went up to the bedroom, took her cell phone from the bedside table, and went back down to the office. He knew the password. It was their wedding date. The phone unlocked easily. Richard began to scroll through the messages. Trivial conversations with friends about fashion, restaurants, trips. Then he found a group called Literary Ladies. There were 5 women, including Marianne. He scrolled back through the messages looking for something, anything, and he found it. A message from Marianne 2 weeks ago. "Girls, you can't imagine what I'm going through. My mother-in-law here at home is driving me crazy. The woman stinks of soy sauce and keeps cooking things that make the house smell like a cheap Oriental restaurant. I can't stand it anymore." Her friends responded with laughing emojis, some with messages of support. "Send her back where she came from," one wrote. "Put her in a Japanese nursing home," another suggested. Marianne continued, "The worst part is that Richard gets all emotional because it's his dear mummy, right? But let's face it, the woman looks like an Asian cockroach, resilient, small, and always where she shouldn't be. Yesterday she had the nerve to make tempura for visitors. Tempura, as if we were a neighborhood restaurant." Richard felt nauseous. He continued reading, each word a stab. There were more recent messages from the last few days. Marianne described a plan. She said she was going to start noting down episodes of mental confusion from her mother-in-law. She already had a list in her phone's notepad. Forgot to turn off the stove. Confused salt with sugar. Asked the same thing 3 times. Aggressive behavior with the maid. The E. Strategy was clear. Marianne wanted to build a history that would justify committing Mrs. Yoshiko somewhere, claiming dementia or cognitive problems. All the notes were false, Richard was sure. His mother was lucid, had an excellent memory, and was careful with everything she did. He photographed all the conversations with his own phone, returned Marianne's phone to its place, and went back to the office. The sun was already beginning to lighten the London sky. One piece was missing from that puzzle. He needed to talk to Nancy, the maid who had worked in the house for 3 years. Richard waited until 7 in the morning, when Nancy usually arrived. He intercepted her at the service entrance before she entered the house. Nancy was a 50-year-old woman, her black hair tied in a ponytail, her eyes tired but kind. She was startled to see him. "Mr. Richard, you arrived yesterday and I didn't even get to greet you properly." "Good morning, Nancy. I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we talk out here?" Her face changed. It became tense, apprehensive. "Did something happen?" "You're going to tell me." Richard crossed his arms. "I want you to be honest. With me. Completely honest. How does my wife treat my mother when I'm not here?" Nancy looked away. She nervously fiddled with her purse straps. "Mr. Richard, I don't want any trouble. I need this job. You won't have any trouble, I promise. But I need to know the truth." There was a long silence. Nancy took a deep breath, and when she looked back at Richard, there were tears in her eyes. "Mr. Richard, it's horrible. Mrs. Marianne treats your mother very badly. She curses, shouts, humiliates her. She throws away the food she makes. She says the house stinks because of her. The other day she pushed Mrs. Yoshiko in the kitchen and the old lady fell. I wanted to help, but Mrs. Marianne said that if I said anything, she would fire me and even invent that I was stealing." Richard closed his eyes. Hearing that confirmed was even worse than seeing it in the recordings. Did she say anything else? Did she threaten you in any other way? She said no one would believe me because I'm just a maid. She said I would lose my references, that I would be out of work in all. Of Southwest London. I have 3 children, Mr. Richard. I can't lose this job. You won't lose it, Nancy. I guarantee it. But I need you to help me. Do you have any proof of what you're saying? Anything I can use? Nancy thought for a moment. I wrote a letter. I thought about giving it to you when you came back from your trip, but I was afraid. It's in my purse. I wrote down everything I've seen in the last 2 months. She took a crumpled envelope from her purse and handed it to Richard. He opened it and read quickly. It was a handwritten letter detailing episode by episode. There were even direct quotes of what Marianne said. This Chinese food only serves to attract cockroaches. Useless old woman who's good for nothing. She should have stayed in the tenement building she came from. Richard folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Thank you, Nancy. You did the right thing. And one more thing. Do you know if my mother writes anywhere? A diary, a notebook, something like that? Yes, I do. She has a notebook she writes in every day in Japanese. It's hidden among the books in her room behind that big encyclopedia. Richard thanked her again and entered the house. He went straight to Mrs. Yoshiko's room. The door was closed, but he knew she must already be awake. He knocked lightly. "Mum, can I come in?" Mrs. Yoshiko opened the bedroom door with a tired smile. She was wearing a simple cotton kimono, her hair already combed, tied in a low bun. The room was modest compared to the rest of the mansion. She had insisted on not bringing new furniture, preferring her old things from the Shoreditch apartment. The single bed with a floral bedspread, the dark wooden dresser, the Buddhist altar in the corner with a photo of her husband who had passed away 15 years ago. "Good morning, son. Awake so early? Travel doesn't let you sleep properly, does it?" Richard entered and closed the door behind him. He sat in the chair next to the desk where his mother usually read. "Mum, I need to talk to you. Seriously." Her face became apprehensive. "Did something happen?" "I saw, Mum. I saw how Marianne treats you. I saw it on the cameras. I saw everything." Mrs. Yoshiko looked away. Her small hands began to tremble. She sat on the bed, her shoulders hunched. "Richard, son, you don't need to worry. They're just misunderstandings. I'm old. Sometimes I do wrong things. I make the house smell." "No, Mum, you didn't do anything wrong." Richard knelt in front of her, holding her hands. "Why did you never tell me? Why did you keep quiet?" Tears began to stream down the elderly woman's wrinkled face. "Because you were happy, my son. You like her. I didn't want to ruin your marriage. I'm already a burden in your lives. I didn't want to be an even bigger problem. You were never a burden. Never. And I don't like someone who mistreats my mother. Where is the notebook? What do you write?" Mrs. Yoshiko hesitated, then slowly got up and went to the bookshelf. She pulled out the thick encyclopedia and from behind it took a blue hardcover notebook. She handed it to Richard. "It's all in Japanese. I've been writing since I arrived here. I write because I need to get it out, otherwise it all feels heavy inside my chest." Richard opened the notebook. The pages were filled with his mother's delicate handwriting, the Japanese characters forming perfect lines. He didn't read Japanese fluently, but he recognized some words: pain, silence, shame, son. "I'm going to ask someone to translate this. I need to know everything that happened. But now, Mum, I want you to tell me in your own words, when did this start?" Mrs. Yoshiko sat down again, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her kimono. "It started the first week I came to live here. At first she was polite when you were around, but when we were alone she changed. She said I didn't fit in here, that this was her house, that I had to stay quiet in my corner. And it got worse. It did. She started throwing away the food I made. She said it smelled bad, that it was poor people's food. One day I made dumplings, the ones you love, remember? She threw everything in the trash in front of me and said, 'Where do you think you are? In China. This is Kensington. Learn your place.'" Richard clenched his fists. The anger was so intense he felt his blood pulsing in his temples. She cursed at me almost every day. Useless old woman, dead weight, oriental cockroach. She said I should go back to the tenement building, that people like me didn't belong in places like this. One day I was washing dishes and she pushed me. I fell and hit my back. It hurt a lot. I was in pain for 3 days, but I didn't say anything to you. I didn't want to worry you. Mum, how did you endure all this alone? Because you are my son. You fought so hard to get where you are. You built all this with your own hands, with your hard work. I couldn't be the person who destroyed your happiness. I preferred to suffer in silence. Richard hugged his mother. She was so small, so fragile. How had he not noticed her suffering? How had he been so blind? I'm sorry, Mum. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, but it's over now. I'm going to fix this. What are you going to do? I'm going to confront her. I'm going to show her the evidence, and I'm going to make a decision. Mrs. Yoshiko held her son's face with both hands. Son, think carefully. Divorce is a serious matter. You will lose a lot. Half the assets, perhaps the house. She is young, beautiful, has a rich family. She will sue you. She will defame you. It doesn't matter. None of that matters if it means you will continue to suffer. There is no money, no house, nothing worth more than my mother's dignity. They hugged for a few minutes in silence. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the Buddhist altar in the corner. Richard looked at his father's photo. He had been a simple man, worked his whole life in a mechanic's workshop, but had always treated Mrs. Yoshiko like a queen. He had taught his son that family was what mattered most, that honor and respect were non-negotiable values. Your father would be proud of you, Mrs. Yoshiko said softly. I always knew I raised a good man. Richard stood up. I'm taking the notebook to be translated. I need everything documented. And Mum, from now on, you will not be alone with her. I'll talk to Nancy. I'll reorganize things here. You'll be fine, I promise. When he went downstairs, Richard found Marianne in the living room drinking her morning green juice. She was impeccable as always. Light makeup, brushed hair, expensive gym clothes. She smiled when she saw him. Good morning, darling. You're up early. Couldn't sleep? Slept little, Richard replied, keeping his voice neutral. He needed to control his anger. He couldn't explode before having everything organized. Oh, it's jet lag. It'll pass. Do you want me to ask Nancy to make that special coffee you like? No need. I'm going out. I have a few things to sort out. Marianne frowned. Going out? But you just got back. I thought we'd spend the day together. We have so much to talk about. So many decisions about the house, about the trip we planned. We'll talk later. I need to go now. He grabbed his car keys and left. Marianne stood still in the living room, watching him through the window. There was something different about him, something in the way he looked at her, cold and distant. A shiver ran down her spine, but she pushed the thought away. Everything was under control. It always had been. Richard drove to the office of a friend, Henry Tanaka, a lawyer specializing in family law. Henry and he had known each other since childhood, had grown up together in Shoreditch, attended the same Japanese community parties. If there was anyone Richard fully trusted, it was him. The office was on Oxford Street, on the 20th floor of a commercial building. The secretary announced Richard, and Henry received him immediately. He was a tall man wearing glasses, always serious, but with a warm smile for his friends. Richard, what a surprise. I didn't know you were back already. How was China? Henry, I need your help. It's urgent and it's personal. The lawyer's smile disappeared. Sit down. Tell me everything. Richard opened his backpack and took out the USB drive with the recordings, his cell phone with the photos of Marianne's conversations, Nancy's letter, and Mrs. Yoshiko's notebook. He placed everything on the table. I discovered that my wife is mistreating my mother. I have proof. I need to know what to do legally. Henry took the materials and began to examine them. As he watched the videos, read the messages and the letter, his expression grew increasingly serious. When he finished, 20 minutes later, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Richard, this is serious. Very serious. It constitutes mistreatment, physical aggression, psychological abuse. You have more than enough evidence not only for a divorce, but for more severe legal measures. I don't want to prosecute her criminally. I just want her out of my house and out of my mother's life. I understand. But you need to be prepared. With this evidence, you have all the advantages in the divorce. She won't be able to take half the assets, especially if we can prove that the marriage was based on misrepresentation and that she committed acts that justify the separation due to her exclusive fault. Richard spent the rest of the day in Henry's office, organizing all the documentation. The lawyer requested an urgent translation of Mrs. Yoshiko's diary by a sworn Japanese translator. Meanwhile, he prepared an extrajudicial notice and put together the divorce strategy. Each page of the diary was a stab to Richard's heart. His mother described in detail the humiliation, the loneliness, the fear. In a particularly painful passage, Mrs. Yoshiko wrote, "Today I made tempura for dinner. I remembered when Richard was little and would ask me to make it every week, but Marianne came into the kitchen and said the whole house stank of cheap oil. She threw everything in the trash. I stood there looking at that wasted food and thought, just as she throws away the food, she throws away my dignity. But I prefer the silence of pain to the noise of shame I might cause my son. He deserves to be happy, even if it means I have to disappear a little more each day." When Richard read that, he had to leave the room. He went to the bathroom and washed his face, trying to control his emotions. His mother was literally fading away so as not to disrupt his life. And he, blind to his work and the illusion of a perfect marriage, had seen nothing. By late afternoon, Henry had everything ready. "Do you want to do this today? Confront her today?" "Yes, the sooner the better. I don't want my mother to spend another day in that situation." "So it will be like this. You get home, call her for a private conversation, show her the evidence. I recommend you record this conversation, but discreetly. Leave your phone recording in your pocket. Anything she says could be useful later. And Richard, be prepared. She might react badly. She might try to manipulate. She might cry. She might threaten. Stay calm." "I will." Richard returned home as the sun was setting over London. The sky was orange, the city lights beginning to come on. He parked the car and stayed there for a few minutes, taking deep breaths, preparing himself. He wasn't afraid of Marianne's reaction. He was sure of what he was doing. He entered through the main door. The house was silent. Nancy had already left. Mrs. Yoshiko was probably in her room. Marianne was in the living room, flipping through a home decor magazine, a glass of white wine in her hand. She looked up when she heard him enter. "Finally, you've been out all day. I was starting to get worried." "Marianne, we need to talk, now." She noticed his serious tone. She slowly closed the magazine. "Talk about what? Did something happen?" "Let's go to the office in private." Marianne got up, grabbed her wineglass, and followed him. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't identify, but it made her uneasy. Richard opened the office door and waited for her to enter. He closed the door, behind them. His phone was already in his pocket, recording. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the armchair. "Richard, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He opened the laptop on the desk and turned the screen towards her. He clicked play on one of the videos. It was the scene of her pushing Mrs. Yoshiko in the kitchen. The sound wasn't clear, but the images were unmistakable. Marianne's face turned pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Richard clicked on another video. Marianne throwing food in the trash, then another. Marianne cursing at her mother-in-law in the hallway. He let 3 videos play before pausing. 30 days of recordings. I have over 20 documented episodes. Physical aggression, verbal abuse, psychological humiliation. All recorded. Marianne recovered quickly. "Richard, I can explain. You don't understand the context. Your mother is difficult. She doesn't respect the house's space. She does things that—" "I'm not finished." Richard took out his own phone and showed her the photos of the group chat conversations. Read it out loud." She looked at the screen. She saw her own words. "Stinks of soy sauce, Asian cockroach, useless old woman." Her face went from white to red. "That was taken out of context. I was just venting to my friends. I was stressed." "And this?" Richard showed the notes about the false dementia episodes. You were building a false history to commit my mother. All invented. All lies. Marianne stood up, the wineglass trembling in her hand. Okay. You want me to admit it? I admit it. I can't stand your mother. She doesn't belong in this house, Richard. Look at her. Look at how she dresses, how she talks, the food she makes. This is Kensington. My friends come here and have to deal with an old woman who looks like she walked out of a documentary about immigrants. Stop talking. Richard's voice was cold, cutting. I won't stop. You asked for the truth, so you're going to hear it. I didn't marry you to have to put up with a mother-in-law living in my house, making smelly Chinese food, wearing those ridiculous kimonos. I deserved a different life. You had to choose, Richard. Choose between me and that outdated old woman. I already chose. The silence that followed was heavy. Marianne realized too late what she had said. She tried to backtrack. Richard, darling, I didn't mean that. I was upset. You caught me by surprise with these videos. You were never family. She is. Always has been and always will be. Richard opened a folder on the table and took out a document. Extrajudicial notice. You have 48 hours to leave this house. The divorce is already being prepared. With all this evidence, you won't take anything but your clothes and personal belongings. My lawyer has already filed for division of assets due to your exclusive fault. Marianne dropped the glass. The wine spread across the Persian rug. You can't do this. This house is mine too. These assets are mine. I'll sue you. I'll take half of everything. I'll ruin you. You can try. But all the videos, all the messages, Nancy's testimony, my mother's diary, everything will be presented to the judge. You committed domestic violence, Marianne, elder abuse. That's not just grounds for divorce, it's grounds for criminal prosecution. You don't have the courage to do that. I won't prosecute you criminally. But if you try anything against me or my mother, if you try to defame, if you try to invent stories, I will make sure to use all available legal avenues. Is that understood? Marianne trembled with rage. Her eyes gleamed with tears of fury. You'll regret this, Richard Matsumoto. I'll spread the word about who you really are. I'll tell everyone that you're a chauvinist, that you mistreated me, that you threw me out of my home. Do whatever you want, but you have 48 hours. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll go to the police and file a report for domestic violence against an elderly person. Then you'll leave with a police escort. Marianne grabbed the purse from the chair and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned. You're choosing that old woman instead of me. You're pathetic. You'll die alone taking care of an old lady who doesn't even speak English properly. I'd prefer that company 1,000 times over yours. Now get out of my sight. She slammed the door shut. Richard heard her footsteps going up the stairs, probably going to her room to pack some things. He sat in the chair, exhausted. His hands still trembled, his heart pounded. But there was a sense of relief too, a certainty that he had done the right thing. Half an hour later, Marianne came down with 2 suitcases. She walked through the living room without looking at him and exited through the front door. The sound of her car starting and driving out of the garage echoed through the house. Then, silence. Richard went up to his mother's room. He knocked lightly on the door. Mum, can I come in? Mrs. Yoshiko opened the door. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. I heard everything, son. The walls are thin. She's gone. She won't be coming back. It's over. The elderly woman hugged her son. You didn't have to do that. You lost your marriage because of me. I didn't lose anything worthwhile, Mum. I lost an illusion, but I gained the opportunity to do what's right. You deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to be treated like the queen you've always been in this family. The first few days after Marianne's departure were strange. The Kensington mansion seemed larger, emptier, but at the same time lighter. It was as if an invisible weight had been removed. Richard reorganized the house's routine. Nancy now worked more flexible hours, with extra days off and a significant salary increase. She and Mrs. Yoshiko became close friends, talking about recipes, about life, about the challenges of being a woman in a society that so often made them invisible. News of the divorce spread quickly through London's social circles. Marianne tried, as she had promised, to spread her version of the story. She told her friends that Richard was a cold, controlling man who had thrown her out of the house without reason. But Henry acted fast. He sent edited copies of the videos to some strategic contacts, just enough to make it clear who was lying. Marianne's version collapsed in a matter of days. Some of her old friends, including those from the message group, sought out Richard to apologize. They said they didn't know the gravity of the situation, that they thought Marianne was just venting. He received them politely, but kept his distance. Those people had laughed at the cruel comments, had normalized prejudice. They were not the kind of company he wanted to keep. The divorce was finalized in 3 months. Marianne tried to contest it, hired expensive lawyers, but the evidence was irrefutable. She left the process with only her personal belongings and a small amount agreed upon in court. The mansion, the company, the investments, everything stayed with Richard. The judge was clear in the sentence. Marianne's conduct constituted a serious violation of conjugal duties and fully justified the separation due to her exclusive fault. With the divorce concluded, Richard began to rebuild his life in a different way. He realized that he had spent years living according to an image of success that did not represent him. The mansion was too big. The parties Marianne organized were superficial. The friendships were based on status and not on true connection. Mrs. Yoshiko, in turn, flourished. Without Marianne's oppressive presence, she began to cook freely again. The kitchen, once a sterile and little-used space, transformed into the heart of the home. Aromas of miso soup, tempura, yakisoba, and Japanese savory pastries filled the rooms. Richard would return from work to find his mother humming old Japanese songs, stirring pots, smiling. One day, 2 months after the divorce, Richard came home and found Mrs. Yoshiko animatedly talking with 3 neighborhood children in the garden. On the low wooden table she had placed there were brushes, black ink, and rice paper. She was teaching Japanese calligraphy. "Mom? What's this?" Mrs. Yoshiko stood up, her face illuminated. "Oh, son, these are Lucas, Marina, and Peter. Their parents asked if I could teach calligraphy to the children. I started last week, twice a week. It's so good to have this young energy around." The children looked at Richard with curious eyes. "You're Mrs. Yoshi's son," said Lucas, a boy about 8 years old. "She's really cool. She's teaching us to write our names in Japanese." Richard smiled. He saw the papers on the table, each with childish attempts to reproduce the complex characters. His mother had infinite patience, gently correcting, praising every progress. "How nice, can I see?" Marina, a girl with braids, proudly showed her paper. "Look, this is my name. Mrs. Yoshi said it means from the sea in Japanese." "Very beautiful. You're lucky to have such a good teacher." After the children left, Richard and Mrs. Yoshiko stayed in the garden, watching the sunset. "Mum, I'm so happy to see you like this, doing what you like, being valued. You know, son, I spent so much time thinking I was a burden, that I was in the way, that I had no place, but now I understand that my place was always here. I just needed space to breathe. And you'll have all the space you need. By the way, I was thinking, how about we transform that room Marianne used for book club meetings into a classroom space, with tatami mats, cushions, calligraphy materials. You could give regular classes." Mrs. Yoshiko's eyes sparkled. "Seriously? You'd let me?" "Of course. This is your home, Mum. It's not a concession. It's not a favor. It's your home. And I want you to feel that way." In the following months, the room was renovated. Richard hired an architect to create a traditional Japanese space within the contemporary mansion. Shoji screens, authentic tatami mats, a shelf with brushes and inks, cushions for students to sit on. Mrs. Yoshiko began teaching 3 times a week. First came the neighborhood children, then some adults interested in learning about Japanese culture. The house was transforming. What was once a showroom of corporate success now had life, had purpose. Richard noticed the difference in himself too. He came home earlier from work, participated in his mother's classes, learned things about his own culture that he had neglected for years. It was during one of these classes that he met Caroline Yamamoto. She was an architect, 35 years old, and had been called by one of the students' mothers for a renovation quote. She appeared at the house on a Saturday afternoon when the calligraphy class was taking place in the garden. Mrs. Yoshiko welcomed her warmly and invited her to watch. Caroline sat on one of the cushions, observing the class. She had straight black hair to her shoulders, almond-shaped eyes, a gentle smile. She wore simple but elegant clothes. There was something about her that immediately caught Richard's attention. It wasn't just her beauty, but a serenity, a calm presence. After the class, while the children played in the garden, Mrs. Yoshiko introduced Caroline to Richard. "Son, this is Caroline Yamamoto. She's an architect, recommended by Lucas's mother for a project." "Nice to meet you, Caroline," Richard Matsumoto. "The pleasure is mine. Your mother is an incredible teacher. I was enchanted by the class. Are you interested in calligraphy?" "I am. In fact, I'm interested in everything involving Japanese culture. My grandparents were from Okinawa. I grew up with many stories, but I never properly learned calligraphy. I always wanted to." Mrs. Yoshiko, with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes, intervened. "Why don't you come to the classes, Caroline? I also have a class on Tuesdays and Thursdays evenings for adults." "I'd love to. Seriously, if it's not an inconvenience." "No inconvenience at all. In fact, since you're coming anyway, how about we have dinner together afterwards? I insist." Richard looked at his mother. She was doing this on purpose, he knew, but he didn't mind. There was something about Caroline that attracted him, an authenticity he hadn't seen in a long time. Caroline accepted the invitation. She started attending the Tuesday evening classes. She always arrived punctually, participated with genuine enthusiasm, asked intelligent questions. After classes, she stayed for dinner. Conversations flowed naturally. She talked about her architectural projects, about how she tried to incorporate traditional elements into modern constructions. Richard talked about his company, about the challenges of the technology market. But what brought the two closer was the way Caroline treated Mrs. Yoshiko. There was no condescension, no pity. There was genuine respect, admiration. Caroline asked for advice on decoration, on how to incorporate Japanese elements into projects. She talked about history, about Japanese immigration in the United Kingdom. She listened to Mrs. Yoshiko's stories with real attention. One evening after class, the three were having soba noodles prepared by Mrs. Yoshiko. Caroline commented, "You know, Mrs. Yoshi, my grandmother used to say that a house is only a home when it smells of food made with love. This house has that smell. It's welcoming." Mrs. Yoshiko smiled, touched. "Thank you, dear. A few months ago, someone said my food stank. Today, you say it's welcoming. Funny how things change." Richard and his mother exchanged a look. They didn't need to say anything. Both knew it was healing, it was recovery. 6 months after the divorce, Richard's life had a new routine, a new rhythm. He woke up earlier to have coffee with his mother. They talked about the day's plans, about the classes she would give, about the students. The house was no longer silent and cold. There were voices, laughter, the sound of children playing in the garden on Saturdays. Caroline had become a constant presence. What started as calligraphy classes evolved into regular dinners, then weekend outings. Richard felt comfortable with her in a way he had never felt with Marianne. There were no games, no masks. Caroline was direct, honest, had strong opinions, but knew how to listen. And above all, she saw Mrs. Yoshiko not as an obstacle or a burden, but as a fascinating person, full of stories and wisdom. One Tuesday evening, after the calligraphy class, Caroline stayed to help Mrs. Yoshiko organize the materials. Richard was in the office finishing some emails. When he came down, he found the two talking animatedly in the kitchen, preparing tea. "What are you two talking about so animatedly?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Caroline smiled. "Mrs. Yoshi was telling me about her marriage, about how she met your father. It's a beautiful story." "Our mum loves to tell that story. I've heard it 1,000 times. Richard approached, took a cup of tea. "But I never tire of telling it," Mrs. Yoshiko said, her eyes sparkling. "I met your father at a Japanese community party in Shoreditch. I was 18, he was 20. He was shy, couldn't even look me in the eyes. But he sent a friend to ask if I would dance. We danced all night. 3 months later, he asked my parents for my hand. And they were happy for 40 years." Richard completed, a lump in his throat. Yes. He was a simple man, but honorable. He treated me like a queen. He said I was his treasure. Mrs. Yoshiko looked at Caroline. You know, dear, marriage isn't about having the perfect person. It's about having the right person. The person who respects you, who values you, who truly sees you. Caroline nodded thoughtfully. My grandmother used to say something similar. She said true love is what makes you grow, not what diminishes you. Richard watched the two women talking. There was a connection there, a harmony. He realized at that moment that he was falling in love with Caroline. It wasn't the overwhelming and superficial passion he had felt for Marianne at first. It was something deeper, more solid. It was admiration, respect, and a genuine desire to build something together. In the following weeks, Richard and Caroline grew even closer. He invited her out for dinner, just the two of them. They went to a traditional Japanese restaurant in Shoreditch, talked for hours about dreams, about the past, about what they wanted for the future. Caroline told him about a previous relationship that had ended badly, about how she was afraid to commit again. Richard shared his experience with Marianne, about how the divorce had transformed him. You know what I learned from all this, Richard said, holding Caroline's hand across the table. I learned that success isn't what I thought it was. It's not having the biggest house, the most expensive car, the prettiest wife to appear in photos. Success is having peace. It's coming home and feeling good. It's looking at the people around you and knowing they are there because they want to be, not because they need to be or because they are pretending. Caroline squeezed his hand. And you have that now? I do. Thanks to my mother, who taught me what truly matters, and thanks to you, who appeared and showed me that it's possible to start over. They kissed there, in that simple Shoreditch restaurant, surrounded by the murmur of Japanese conversations, by the smell of homemade food. It was a soft kiss, full of promise. When Richard told Mrs. Yoshiko that he was officially dating Caroline, she cried with joy. Son, I pray every day that you find someone who truly makes you happy. Caroline is a special young woman. She has a good heart. I know, Mum, and she adores you. That's important to me, very important. To me too, son. After everything I went through with Marianne, I was afraid you would never trust anyone again. But Caroline is different. She sees me. She respects me. She doesn't pretend. Caroline began to spend more time at the house. She helped Mrs. Yoshiko with the classes, brought new materials, suggested activities. She proposed creating a small Zen garden in the back of the property, with stones, sand, and typical plants. Richard loved the idea and hired her to design the project. During the construction of the garden, which took 2 months, Caroline practically lived at the house. She supervised every detail, worked alongside the gardeners, consulted Mrs. Yoshiko on every decision. The result was beautiful. A space of peace with a wooden bridge over a small pond, stone lanterns, strategically planted cherry trees. At the garden's inauguration, Mrs. Yoshiko organized a tea ceremony. She invited all the students, some neighbors and friends from the Japanese community. It was a beautiful afternoon. Children played among the stones. Adults enjoyed the tea served in a traditional ceremony. Everyone admired Caroline's work. Richard watched her coordinate everything with Mrs. Yoshiko, the two laughing, adjusting cushions, serving sweets. Henry, the lawyer friend, was there too. He approached Richard with a smile. Man, what a transformation. This house is unrecognizable. And your mother, I've never seen her so happy. Yes, it's changed a lot, for the better. And Caroline, are you too serious? Richard smiled. We are. She's special, Henry. She's everything Marianne never was. True, kind, real. I'm happy for you, brother. You deserve it. After everything you've been through, you deserve this peace. By the end of the afternoon, when the guests had left, Richard, Caroline, and Mrs. Yoshiko sat in the new garden. The sun was setting, tinging everything gold and orange. Mrs. Yoshiko had a brush and rice paper in her hand. I want to show you something. To keep. She began to write a Japanese character, each stroke careful and precise. When she finished, she turned the paper for them to see. Do you know what this is? It's home, isn't it? Caroline asked. Yes, home. See how it's written? It has a roof up here, and underneath it has people, family. The meaning is clear. Home is not just a physical structure. It's a place where there are people who love each other, who respect each other, who are together by choice, not by obligation. Richard felt his eyes well up. Mum, this house is finally a home, thanks to you. No, son. Thanks to you. You had the courage to choose what was right, even when it was difficult. You gave me back my dignity. And now, you are building a new home, with true love. Caroline held Richard's hand. Mrs. Yoshiko smiled at the two of them. At that moment, under the orange sky of London, the three understood that family is not defined by blood or by surname. Family is who is by your side when everything falls apart, who respects you, who truly sees you. The following weeks were filled with planning. Caroline and Richard decided to officially move in together. She didn't have much in the apartment she rented in Notting Hill, so the move was quick. Mrs. Yoshiko insisted on helping decorate their room, brought cushions she had embroidered herself, curtains she had made by hand. Caroline's first night in the house as a resident was special. The three of them had dinner together, soba with tempura, Richard's favorite recipe. They talked about the future, about plans to expand the calligraphy classes, about a possible partnership between Richard's company and the architectural firm where Caroline worked. When they went to bed, Caroline hugged Richard. Thank you for letting me be a part of this family. Thank you for wanting to be a part, for seeing my mother as I see her, for not being afraid of our past. Past is past. What matters is what we build from now on. A year had passed since Richard confronted Marianne, a year of profound transformations, of healing, of rebuilding. The Kensington mansion was no longer just a beautiful house. It was a home pulsating with life. Mrs. Yoshiko's calligraphy classes now took place 4 times a week, with more than 20 regular students, both children and adults. The Zen garden Caroline had designed had become a meeting point for the neighborhood's Japanese community. Richard had also changed, not just emotionally, but professionally. He re-evaluated his business partnerships, distanced himself from business circles that valued only profit and appearances. He began to invest in projects with social impact, supported cultural initiatives of the Japanese-British community. His company continued to prosper, but now it had purpose beyond money. One Saturday morning, Richard woke up to the sound of animated voices coming from the garden. He looked out the window and saw Mrs. Yoshiko surrounded by children, all sitting on colorful cushions. It was a special calligraphy class followed by an origami workshop. Caroline was there too, helping to distribute papers and explain the folds. He went downstairs and into the garden. The sun was radiant, the sky blue and cloudless. The cherry trees that had been planted in the Zen garden were beginning to show their first buds. In a few months there would be flowers. "Good morning," he greeted. The children responded in chorus, some in English, others attempting an "Ohayo gozaimasu" that drew laughter from Mrs. Yoshiko. "Son, come see what the children are doing." She waved for him to come closer. "We're teaching the character for happiness, and then we're going to make origami cranes." Richard sat next to Caroline, who kissed him on the cheek. "Did you sleep well?" "Very." "And you? Woke up early to help with the class?" "Of course. I love these Saturdays. Your mother is amazing with the children." They watched Mrs. Yoshiko patiently explain each stroke of the character, gently correct, praise every attempt. The 73-year-old woman who a year ago was shrunken, humiliated, faded, now shone. Her voice was firm, her gestures confident. She had purpose, had joy, had restored dignity. Lucas, the 8-year-old boy who had been one of the first students, raised his hand. "Mrs. Yoshi, can I ask a question?" "Of course, dear. Are you happy?" The question caught everyone by surprise. Mrs. Yoshiko paused, her brush suspended in the air, or looked at the boy, then at the other children, then at Richard and Caroline. A soft smile formed on her face. "You know, Lucas, happiness is an interesting thing. When I was younger, I thought happiness was not having problems, not having difficulties. But today, I know that happiness is having people who truly love you. It's being able to do what you like, it's being respected. So yes, I am very happy." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered the diary his mother had written, the desperate words about preferring the silence of pain to the noise of shame, how things had changed, how she had changed, or, rather, how she had returned to being who she always was, free from the oppression that stifled her. After the class, when the children left, the three stayed in the garden. Nancy brought a tray with tea and homemade biscuits that Mrs. Yoshiko had taught her to make. It was a quiet Saturday, unhurried, with no urgent commitments. "You know what I was thinking," Caroline said, biting a biscuit. "We could expand the classes, like create monthly workshops on Japanese culture, not just calligraphy, but cooking, tea ceremony, ikebana. I'm sure many people would be interested." Mrs. Yoshiko brightened. "I'd love to. I've always wanted to teach these things, but I never had the opportunity." "Then let's do it. I can help with the organization, the promotion. Richard, are you in?" Caroline looked at him with those bright eyes he loved so much. "Of course I'm in. In fact, I was thinking of something similar. How about we turn this into a non-profit, the Matsumoto Cultural Institute, something like that? We can seek sponsorships, partner with schools, bring Japanese culture to more people." "Son, seriously, you would do that?" I would with great pride. You have so much knowledge, so much wisdom to share. Why not make it official, structured?" The three began to plan right there in the garden under the London sun. The conversation flowed naturally, each contributing ideas with enthusiasm. There was no hierarchy, no imposition. It was pure collaboration, joint construction. In the afternoon, Henry showed up for a visit. He brought documents for the non-profit's constitution, which Richard had asked him to prepare as a surprise. Mrs. Yoshiko was touched to see her name as president of the institute. "But son, I don't know anything about administration." "You don't need to. You know how to teach, how to inspire, how to welcome. We'll sort out the rest. I'll take care of the financial part, Caroline of the physical structure, Henry of the legal. You are the heart of all this." That night, they prepared a special dinner. Mrs. Yoshiko made sushi, Caroline prepared a salad, Richard took care of the drinks. They ate outdoors under the paper lanterns Caroline had installed. The night was starry, rare in London. During dinner, Richard raised his sake glass. "I want to make a toast. A year ago I returned from a trip and discovered that the person I was married to wasn't who I thought. It was painful, it was difficult, but it was necessary, because it led me here. It led me to value what truly matters. So I toast to my mother, the strongest woman I know, and I toast to Caroline, who appeared in my life and showed me that true love exists. And I toast to you, son," Mrs. Yoshiko said, her eyes welling up. "You had courage when it mattered most. You defended me when I no longer had the strength to defend myself. You gave me back my dignity. I am grateful every day." Caroline raised her glass. "And I toast to both of you who welcomed me as family, who showed me what respect is, what true love is. I am privileged to be a part of this story." They clinked glasses, the sound echoing in the night. It was a simple moment, but loaded with meaning. There, in that garden, under those stars, three people who had been hurt by life found healing in each other. Months later, the Matsumoto Cultural Institute was officially inaugurated. The launch party gathered over 100 people, local authorities, members of the Japanese community, old and new students, friends, neighbors. Mrs. Yoshiko was radiant, wearing an elegant kimono that had belonged to her mother. She gave an emotional speech about the importance of preserving culture, of teaching new generations, of building bridges between tradition and modernity. Richard watched from the back of the hall, Caroline by his side. She held his hand and whispered, "Do you see what you created? Do you see the impact a courageous decision can have?" "I see, and I'm grateful every day for having had that courage." The institute prospered. Classes multiplied, new teachers were hired, partnerships with schools were established. Mrs. Yoshiko became a well-known and respected figure, interviewed by newspapers about Japanese British culture, invited to events, admired for her wisdom and kindness. A year after the Institute's inauguration, on a spring Saturday, there was a special ceremony in the garden. The cherry trees finally bloomed, Mrs. Yoshiko had planned a Hanami celebration, the traditional cherry blossom viewing festival. Dozens of people attended, bringing food, drink, joy. Richard and Caroline announced something important that day. They were engaged. The proposal had been simple, intimate, just the two of them in the Zen garden under the blooming cherry trees. And Mrs. Yoshiko would be the maid of honor. When they announced it to those present, there were applause, hugs, tears of joy. Mrs. Yoshiko hugged the two, trembling with emotion. My children, my dear children, I couldn't be happier. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple but beautiful ceremony in the house's own garden. Mrs. Yoshiko prepared the buffet with the help of Nancy and some students from the institute. There was a traditional Japanese ceremony followed by a British celebration, the best of both worlds, as Caroline liked to say. Richard wore her dark suit with Japanese fabric details. Caroline was stunning in a dress that blended Western and Eastern influences, designed by herself. And Mrs. Yoshiko, the maid of honor, wore the most beautiful kimono Richard had ever seen, blue with embroidered birds and flowers. When they exchanged rings, under the cherry blossom arch decorated by Caroline, Richard looked at his mother. She cried with joy, her hands clasped to her chest. He remembered a year and a half ago, when he saw her shrunken in the kitchen, being humiliated, being made invisible. And now there she was, radiant, celebrated, loved. That night when the guests had left, the three sat on the cushions in the garden. It was cool but pleasant. Mrs. Yoshiko had her brush and rice paper in her hand again, just like that day a year ago. I want to write something for you, to keep. She wrote carefully, each stroke precise. When she finished, she showed them the paper. It was the character for home, the same one she had shown before. Remember when I taught you the meaning of this? Home is where there are people who love each other. And here, in this house, I found my home again. You gave that back to me. Mum, we only gave back what was always yours, dignity, respect, love. And I am grateful, every day. She folded the paper carefully and handed it to Richard. Keep this, and when you have children, when you build your own family, always remember, home is not built with money or appearances. It is built with true love. Richard hugged his mother. Caroline joined the hug. There, under the starry London sky, in the blooming garden, surrounded by the smell of homemade food coming from the kitchen, they were a family, not perfect but real, not immune to problems but founded on respect, on truth, on genuine love. Richard understood at that moment that his true success was not in the multi-million-pound contracts, not in the mansion, not in the corporate titles. It was there, in his mother's restored dignity, in Caroline's pure love, in the peace that finally inhabited that house. It was in the courage to have chosen what was right, even when it meant losing everything that seemed perfect. And as he watched the stars, feeling the warmth of the two women he loved most in the world, Richard knew he had made the right choice. He always had, and he always would. Dear listeners, we hope Richard, Mrs. Yoshiko, and Caroline's story has deeply touched your hearts. May it have shown that dignity and respect can never be negotiated, and that true family is built with genuine love, not with appearances. If this story moved you, we have a special playlist full of other narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships, the courage to start anew, and the transformative power of true love. Find it right here and dive into more stories that will make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, as your support motivates us to keep bringing these stories every day. And in the comments we want to know, have you ever had to make a difficult choice between what seemed right and what truly was right? Share your experience with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next story.